The rain came down like it had something to prove. Cold, heavy, relentless. It turned the red Arizona soil to dark clay, washing over the plains with no care for who stood beneath it. Horses scattered, crows vanished, but one figure didn't move. She lay in the mud, face turned to the sky, eyes open, still breathing. Just barely. Her name was Tyen, Apache by blood, nobody by name. The men who had dragged her from the mission school said she was a traitor to her own people. The ones who raised her said she could never truly belong to the world they'd built in polished pews and Latin hymns. So she ran, and ran, and ran, until her body gave out and the storm found her. But it wasn't the rain that woke her. It was the sound of boots in the mud, measured, heavier than the storm, coming closer. She didn't lift her head. She didn't dare. A pause, then a voice, low, rough, and steady. "You alive?" She didn't answer. The man knelt beside her, rugged face, eyes the color of hard dirt. He studied her for a moment, then muttered to himself, "Apache, damn fool girl's gonna drown out here." And just like that, she was lifted, out of the mud, out of the storm, toward a fire she hadn't earned, and a man who owed her nothing. Tyne woke to the smell of smoke and old leather. She was lying on a cot inside a narrow room, the ceiling low, the walls rough-cut pine. A fire crackled in the stove nearby, and the sound of rain still drummed on the tin roof, but softer now, more tired. Her body ached. Her lips were cracked. Her dress, soaked through and crusted with dirt, had been laid carefully over the back of a nearby chair. A wool blanket covered her now, rough but warm. Not hers, not meant for her. She sat up slowly. The door creaked open before she could move. "You're awake," the man said, stepping inside. Same voice, same face as in the storm. Older than she first thought. Mid-40s maybe. Bearded. Eyes like dark clay hardened in fire. "Name's Calder Reeve," he added, setting down a steaming cup on the crate beside her bed. "Coffee. Not strong, but hot." She glanced down, then up, measuring. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said flatly. "If I wanted to, I'd have left you out there to rot." She stayed silent, but not unsure. His expression didn't change. He just let it be. "Suit yourself. You'll need to eat soon." And then he was gone. Tyen waited 5 full minutes before lifting the cup. Her hands trembled. The coffee was bitter, burned at the edges, but real and warm. She closed her eyes, let the heat settle into her chest. Alive, still alive. The next time she saw him, it was through the window. He was out by the corral, working a restless horse. Ropes, gentle commands, no shouting. His movements were slow and deliberate, more like he was speaking to the animal than breaking it. Tyne watched him for nearly an hour. He never looked up. By evening, she had found her voice. Sort of. When he came in to check the fire, she asked, "Why?" Calder didn't flinch. "Why what? Why not turn me in?" He scratched his jaw. "You think that'd go better for you?" "Better than this." He studied her a long moment. "Truth is," he said slowly, "I don't trust folks who get real loud about justice, especially when they mean revenge." She frowned. "I had a brother," he added. "He died in a raid. Apache war party." Tyen's spine stiffened. "I hated all of you for a long time. Then I realized hate didn't change much, just made me tired." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. That night she stayed awake long after the fire died down, not out of fear, but out of unfamiliarity. The walls didn't creak the same as the mission school. There were no bells, no hymns, no rules to memorize, no prayers to say, just silence, and her. Over the next few days she grew stronger. She helped sweep the floor, clean the basin, bring in firewood. Calder didn't ask her to. He barely even acknowledged it. But he left tools within reach, left the door unlocked. And that was enough. He cooked simple meals, beans, biscuits, jerky soaked in broth. Always 2 plates, always quiet. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she didn't. But she listened. To the way he hummed when he fixed saddle straps. To the way he paused before saying anything that mattered. To the way he looked at her, not with pity, with curiosity, and something else. something close to understanding. One morning, Calder handed her a folded cloth. Inside, a worn but clean blouse and a long faded skirt. "They were my wife's," he said simply. "She's been gone a long time. You can wear 'em or not." Tyan took them without a word. She changed in silence. The fabric felt strange against her skin, softer than she was used to, but heavy with something invisible. A memory not hers, a weight she didn't want to name. Later that day, she stepped out onto the porch for the first time. The land stretched in every direction, dry hills, broken fence lines, sky wide enough to swallow a woman whole. Calder was chopping wood. He didn't stop when she stepped outside, didn't comment, just kept working. She watched the rhythm of his axe, the way he exhaled on every swing. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even effort. It was practice. Survival, maybe. As the sun set, she walked down the slope behind the barn. There, under an old cottonwood tree, was a single headstone. No fence, no flowers. Just a name. Eliza Reeve. Below it, 3 words were carved deep and spare. She kept silent. Tyan stood a long time in the dimming light. She whispered something in her mother's tongue. Not a prayer, a promise. That night over supper, Calder spoke again. "You were taught English," he said. "Yes, but you don't speak unless you choose to." "I was taught silence too." He nodded, stirred his beans. "I don't mind it," he said. Tyan looked up. "I don't either." The first sign came in the form of tracks. Calder noticed them just past the northern ridge. Hoof prints that didn't belong to any of his stock. Deep, fresh, and traveling slow. That meant scouts. Or worse, men who weren't in a hurry because they already knew where they were going. He said nothing to Tyan that night, but he cleaned the rifle he hadn't touched in months. Tyan sensed it anyway. The quiet in him changed. Still low, still steady, but not at ease. She watched him sharpen a dull knife with more care than usual. Watched his eyes linger on the tree line a little too long. "Who is it?" she asked. He looked at her over his shoulder. "Don't know yet." "But you will." He nodded once. "I always do." She returned to the garden behind the barn, pulling weeds from dry earth. When her hand brushed something metal, she paused. It was a small medallion, faded leather cord. She lifted it to the light and swallowed. It was Apache, warrior stamped, but broken, snapped in half at the edge. She hadn't seen one since she was 14. She dropped it like it burned her. That night she dreamed of fire, the mission school ablaze, screaming, men on horseback shouting in a tongue she once knew but hadn't spoken in years. She saw herself younger, running barefoot. Behind her a girl fell. Tyan turned back, and the girl looked up with eyes full of blame. "You weren't supposed to live." Tyan woke, choking on her breath, sweat soaking her collarbone. The fire in the stove was low. Calder was gone, but his coat was draped over her boots. The next morning she asked, "Do you know what they say about me?" Calder didn't look up from the saddle he was mending. "Depends who you mean by they." "Apache. I don't talk to them much." "You should." He looked at her then, carefully. "Why?" "Because if they come here, it won't be for cattle." She told him, not everything, but enough. How she was born in a time of war, between tribes, between worlds. How her mother was white, her father Apache. How her mother died giving birth in a white mission far from where she belonged. How the Apache elders marked her early as something dangerous, not because of what she did, but because of what she was. "Half-blood," she said flatly. "Some call us ghosts, some call us shame." He listened, didn't interrupt. When she finished, he only said, "Is that why you ran?" "I didn't run," she whispered. "I was sent away. The priest said I could be saved. I think he meant changed." Calder sat back, quiet. Finally, "You believe him?" "No," she said, "but I tried to." They sat in silence for a while. Then Calder said, "You're not the only one with blood on both sides of the fence." She turned to him sharply. "I had a cousin, married a Comanche girl. He didn't survive it. She didn't either." Tyan's voice dropped. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand," Calder said. "I don't pity you. I don't fear you. But I do know what it's like to be too much of one thing and not enough of the other." Then nodded. That evening, Tyan walked alone to the cottonwood tree. She carried the broken Apache medallion in her hand. Kneeling, she buried it at the foot of Eliza Reeves' grave. "I won't carry you anymore," she whispered. "I am not what you called me." At dusk, two riders crested the ridge. Calder saw them before they saw him. He didn't reach for the rifle. Not yet. One was white, thin, wiry, mustache like a sneer. The other, Apache, young, painted, eyes full of storm. They didn't ride to the house. They stayed just out of range, watching, waiting. Inside, Tyen stood at the window. Her hand rested on the glass. "They've come to remind me what I am," she said. Calder joined her. "No," he said slowly. "They've come to see what you'll choose." She looked up at him. "And if I choose to stay?" He met her gaze. "Then they'll have to learn to live with it." That night she didn't dream of fire. She dreamed of rain, falling soft on a new roof, on a garden blooming out of dry soil. She dreamed of silence that didn't mean shame. And in that dream, she didn't run. She stood. The first thunder came in the middle of the afternoon. Low and rolling, like a memory returning from too far off to ignore. Tyen paused at the edge of the barn, one hand resting against the doorway, the other still gripping the worn bristles of the broom she'd been using to clear straw. She tilted her head toward the sound, listened not like someone waiting for weather, but like someone who had learned long ago to read what the sky wasn't saying. Calder was out by the fence tightening wire. She watched him roll his sleeves slowly as the wind picked up, and the scent of wet dust curled around the edge of the stable. He looked up, met her eyes for a half-second, then wordlessly kept working. By sundown, the storm had arrived full. Rain came down not in sheets but in long strands, steady and silver, soaking the porch, the corral, the dry line where the chickens sometimes huddled. But tonight everything had gone still. Even the animals had found their corners, and Tyen stood beneath the sloped roof just outside the house, bare feet pressed into cool wood. She didn't mind the rain. Rain didn't ask questions. It didn't wonder who you used to be or why you were still trying to be someone else. Rain just came. She stood like that for a long time, arms folded across her chest, hair damp where it clung to her shoulders. She wore one of Eliza's old dresses again, this one a muted green, too loose at the waist, too short in the sleeves. But she liked the way the fabric moved in the breeze, the way it made her feel less like a stranger to her own skin. Inside, Calder moved quietly. She could hear the scrape of a chair, the clink of tin on tin, a soft grunt as he dropped wood near the stove. He wasn't a loud man, but he took up space, not just physically, but with the way he paid attention to the world around him. He noticed things, small things, like how she flinched when the fire cracked too loudly, like how she always kept her back to the wall when she sat, like how she never ate the last piece of bread on a plate, even when he said he didn't want it. She stepped out into the rain without warning. One moment she was watching it fall. The next she was in it. It hit her face like cool silk, ran down her collarbones, darkened the fabric of the dress until it clung to her knees. She didn't move fast or dramatically. She just walked forward into it, slowly, with the kind of softness that comes from knowing there's no one left to impress. The mud squelched between her toes. She tipped her face toward the sky, and she let go. She didn't hear the door open, but she heard his voice. "You'll catch your death like that." It wasn't a scold, just a fact. She didn't turn. "I don't think death is waiting on weather." A pause, then footsteps. He came to stand beside her, close enough to feel, not close enough to touch. "You always walk into storms?" "Only the ones that feel like they know my name." Another pause. He shifted, hands in pockets, boots deep in the muck. "You're not like other people," he said finally. She glanced at him. "That's what people say right before they stop speaking to me." "I'm not planning to stop." She looked at him a long moment. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm tired of quiet that doesn't mean anything." The wind shifted. She shivered slightly. He noticed. Without a word, he took off his coat, coarse wool, damp already at the shoulders, and draped it gently around her. "Here," he said. "Don't prove your point by freezing." She held it closed at the chest. "I wasn't trying to prove anything." "I know." Neither moved, like the air had agreed to hold them there. The storm softening, turning from downpour to whisper. Later, inside, she toweled off near the stove while he set out a second cup. She took it, fingers brushing his. You always keep a second mug ready? Only since you got here. She raised an eyebrow. He didn't explain. Didn't need to. They ate stew that night, slow-cooked rabbit and potatoes. She didn't say much at first, but as the rain tapped the windows, she found her voice. Low, but certain. I think I hated both sides, she said. He looked up. Apache, white. I didn't belong to either. My mother's people wanted me to be quiet, grateful. My father's people wanted me to be wild or invisible. He met her eyes and gave the smallest tilt of his head. Just let her go on. And I tried. I tried to split myself in two, learn the ways, the manners, the words. But no matter what I did, someone always looked at me like I lied. You didn't. She shook her head. They didn't need me to lie. They just needed a reason not to trust me. She swallowed hard. When I ran, it wasn't because I was afraid. It was because no one stayed. He said it, not her. She looked at him. His eyes didn't flinch. You don't know me, she said after a beat. I'm learning. And what if you don't like what you find? I've lived with worse. She tilted her head. That's not romantic. I'm not trying to be romantic. A pause. Then what are you trying to be? His gaze softened just enough to turn dangerous. Here. They didn't speak after that, but when he stood, she stood too. And when he took the pot to the stove, she dried the bowls. Their silence wasn't sharp anymore. It curved, like metal cooling, like heat learning to settle. That night, as she lay in the cot beside the stove, she didn't sleep. Not because of fear, because her mind was full. Of the rain, of his voice, of the way her name sounded in his mouth even when he didn't say it. She turned onto her side, pulled the blanket tighter, and stared at the embers. And just before sleep came, she whispered, I don't want to be a ghost anymore. She didn't know if he heard her, but in the morning his coat was folded at the foot of her bed, dry and warm. Tyan had never been to the center of Dry Creek. She'd passed its edge once, years ago, hidden in a wagon bed under wool blankets and the stench of old onions. She'd seen the steeple rising above the hills, a spindly arm pointing heavenward. Back then, it had meant danger, eyes that narrowed, tongues that hissed. She hadn't expected to go now, but the forge needed iron, and the postmaster had sent word that Calder's tools, blades for the plow, shoes for the mare, had arrived on the last freight. I can ride in, Calder had said. I'll come, Tyan replied before she could stop herself. He turned to her, searched her face. You sure? She nodded once. Not for courage, but because she was tired of hiding. The town wasn't big. 2 rows of buildings hugging the main road, a church with white paint peeling, a schoolhouse that leaned a little left, and a general store that always smelled like tobacco and burlap. Calder tied the horse near the smithy and came around the side, offering Tyan a hand as she stepped down from the wagon. People noticed. They didn't shout, didn't stare long, but they noticed. A few paused mid-step. A shopkeeper fumbled her broom. A boy was pulled sharply aside by his mother. Tyan kept her chin level. Calder didn't say a word. He just walked beside her, solid and steady. Inside the store it was cooler. Diamond Soins. Mr. Dobbins, the proprietor, was behind the counter sorting nails. He looked up, mouth already forming a greeting. It stopped halfway. Reeve! Dobbins! Calder laid the claim slip on the wood. Here for the freight. Dobbins didn't move. Then slowly, eyes sliding toward Tyan, he asked, Who's your companion? Tyan didn't wait for Calder to answer. She stepped forward. I'm no one's, but I help on the ranch. Her voice was clear, not loud, but steady enough to turn heads. Dobbins looked at her. Really looked, then turned and disappeared into the back. As they waited, Tyan touched the shelf near the counter. Someone had carved initials into the wood, JW plus LT, a girl's name, a boy's, the sort of claiming that felt harmless, but had always been forbidden to her. Suddenly, a little girl appeared beside her, blonde, freckled, barefoot. She held out a yellow flower, wilting but bright. For you, she said. Tyan blinked, took it with careful fingers. Thank you. The girl giggled and ran off. Calder watched the whole thing without speaking. When Tyan turned, she found his eyes on hers. Guess not everyone forgets how to be decent, he said. She smiled. It surprised both of them. They loaded the supplies in silence, but something between them had shifted. Not big, not dramatic, just warmer, like a beam of sun that finds the shoulder when the rest of the room is cold. Later, outside the church, they passed two men. One of them, gray-bearded, holding a pipe, snorted. She's that half-blood preacher's girl, ain't she? The other murmured something Tyan didn't catch. Calder stopped. Not fully, but enough. He turned just slightly, just enough for the wind to shift. I heard you. The men blinked. Calder took one step closer. You got something to say about my guest. You say it to her face. Silence. Then a mutter. A retreat. Tyan touched his arm. Not here, she said. He looked at her, then nodded, and they kept walking. Back at the ranch, the quiet felt different. Tyan stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse, holding the yellow flower. It had wilted further, but she didn't throw it away. Instead, she placed it in a small glass jar near the window. Calder watched her from the porch. She looked at me, Tyan said softly, like I belonged in her story. You do, she turned. Do I? He stepped forward. Tyan, I can't fix what people see, but I can decide what I stand beside. She breathed in. I'm tired of being a question. Then be a fact, he said. Let them catch up. That night she didn't sleep in the bunkhouse. She didn't ask permission. She just walked through the back door of the main house, set her boots by the fire, and folded herself into the chair across from Calder. He poured tea without comment. She drank and stayed. The next morning, Tyan awoke to birdsong and the smell of rye bread crisping on the stove. She was still in the main house, still wrapped in the quilt Calder had handed her the night before. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she hadn't dreamt of running. She just woke, like any woman might, in a place that might one day be hers. Calder was already up, sleeves rolled, hair damp from the basin outside. He didn't look surprised to see her in the kitchen. He only said, "Sleep all right?" She nodded. Didn't expect to. He set a tin plate in front of her. Eggs, bread, the last of the summer apples. I wasn't sure how you take your tea. However you make it, she replied. He nodded, poured 2 cups, and they ate like it had always been this way. Outside, the land steamed under the late sun. August had taken the edge off its heat, but the soil still remembered. Tyan walked the fence line barefoot, dress hitched at her knees. She moved slowly, not because she was tired, but because she wasn't. She could feel things settling, not just between her and Calder, within herself. He found her out there an hour later, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. Fence needs mending, he said. I saw. Want to help? Her eyes did the answering, just held out her palm for the nails. And they worked, side by side. No orders, no instructions, just motion. At midday, they sat beneath the cottonwood. He passed her a flask of water. She sipped, passed it back. Neither said much, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the kind of things that didn't need speaking. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was quiet. They'll come back, Calder nodded. Maybe. You think I'm worth standing beside? He turned toward her, met her eyes with a steadiness that startled her. I think you're worth standing with. A breath caught in her throat. Then, that's not the same. No, he agreed. It's better. That evening, she found a folded cloth on the porch bench. Inside, a simple linen shirt and trousers, plain but new. Not a dress, not Eliza's. Heron. She held the bundle to her chest, breath shallow. Calder's voice came from behind her. Didn't figure you for lace. I'm not. Figured that too. She smiled, a real one, and he smiled back. Later, as she scrubbed the shirt in the basin, Calder came to the door. I've got something for you, he said. He held out a carved piece of wood. It was an amulet, a small disc, edges smoothed, a sun burned into its center. My father made one like this for me once, he said. Said it meant strength found in quiet. She took it slowly. It's not Apache, she said. No, he replied. It's mine. Tyan looked up. You giving it to me? I'm offering it. She closed her fingers around it, and for the first time in her life, she felt something new. Chosen, not because of what she could offer, not because of what she represented, but simply because she was. That night, they sat by the fire. No one knocked. No one watched. Tyan wore the shirt. Calder rested his arm on the back of her chair. Not quite a touch, but close enough to count. He asked her softly, "What would you be if you could choose?" She didn't answer at first, then, "Free," he nodded. "That's what I want too." In the middle of the night, thunder rumbled again. She sat up in the dark, breath still. Calder stirred beside the fire. "Bad dream?" She shook her head. "Number just remembering." "What?" She stared at the ceiling. "When I was a child, I used to believe the sky was two-sided," she said. "One side for those who belonged, the other for those who watched." "And which side were you on?" She looked down. "The part that never got to speak." Calder stood, walked over, and knelt beside her. "Well," he said, "I think it's time you did." At dawn, they found the painted Apache boy waiting near the creek. Alone this time. His face was unreadable. Tyan stepped forward. "Why are you here?" He held up a hand, not in threat, in peace. "I'm not here to drag you back," he said. "I'm here to tell you, you're not hunted anymore." She blinked. "Why?" "The old men said to let ghosts be ghosts." "And what do you say?" He looked at her for a long time. Then, "I say, you never were one." He turned to leave, then paused. "In your language, do you still remember the word for stand?" Tyan nodded. "Natsilid." "Then do that." And he left. That evening, Tyan stood at the edge of the field and lifted the amulet Calder had carved to the sky. Not like a prayer, like a marker, like something earned. Inside, Calder prepared supper. She would walk in soon, sit beside him, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen it, and because now, someone had chosen her too. It began with quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over a home only when no one is trying to fill it. Calder rose first. He always did. He fed the mare, checked the gate, and stoked the fire before the sun had stretched over the hills. Tyan awoke with the scent of smoke and wild sage. She dressed in silence, no longer in borrowed cotton or stitched lace. She wore trousers now, like he did, with boots broken in by dust and rain. Her hair was braided loosely down her back, tied with a strip of worn fabric she'd torn from the lining of Eliza's old quilt. It had stopped feeling like taking something. It had started to feel like weaving. Outside, the sky hung low with the promise of rain. It didn't worry her. Rain didn't mean fleeing anymore. Rain had become something different now, like breath, like renewal. She stepped out into the yard and breathed in deeply. The air tasted of horses, wood smoke, and whatever it was that came when a woman had stayed long enough in one place to leave her own scent on the land. Calder was by the chicken coop when she joined him. He handed her a basket of feed. "Thought you'd sleep in." "I thought about it," he grunted, which in Calder's language meant "good to see you." They fed the birds together, moving in rhythm. When they finished, he gestured to the far corner of the property, just past the cottonwood tree and the thin strip of wildflowers Tyan had planted weeks ago. "Something I want to show you," he said. The walk was short, but it felt longer, like every step was a memory rising to meet her. The place he led her to was marked only by a small wooden stake. No stone, no carving, just a flat patch of turned earth and the smell of damp cedar. "I started clearing this 2 summers ago," he said. "Figured I'd build a shed, or maybe a second barn." He scratched the back of his neck. "Never finished." Tyan stood very still. "Why are you showing me this?" He shrugged. "Thought maybe you'd want to build something." "With you?" "With whoever you are when you look at this land and see yourself in it." She stared at him, and then she did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She reached up, cupped his face, and kissed him. Not quick, not tentative, like a woman who had stopped asking permission. Later that day, Tyan found the box. It was hidden behind old saddles and coils of rusted wire in the barn loft. Inside, letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Calder, some unopened, all yellowed at the edges. She didn't open them, but she carried the box into the house. Calder was sitting on the floor, sharpening a blade. She set the box down. "You kept them." "I don't read them," he said. "I didn't ask if you did." He looked up at her. His voice was quiet. "I didn't throw them away either." She sat beside him. "Sometimes we don't need to burn the past. We just need to stop building fires to sit beside it." He exhaled slowly and said nothing more. They didn't need many words anymore. But that night they shared the same bed for the first time, not from passion, but from stillness, from the way her breath settled against his shoulder, from the way his arm fit around her waist like it had been made to belong there all along. She didn't ask what it meant. He made no promises, but the silence between them hummed with something sacred. In the morning they began clearing the earth. Tyan worked beside him, digging with her hands while he turned soil with the flat of a shovel. They found old nails, splintered wood, a coin from a town neither had ever been to. By noon the dirt was bare. By evening she had drawn plans on the back of a feed sack. Lines for a new structure, half forge, half garden shed. "I want a place that's both," she said. "Both what?" "Strong and growing." He nodded like he understood, because maybe finally he did. 1 week later, a rider came up the hill. Not Apache, not Bounty, just a man with a long coat, a letter, and a name Tyen hadn't heard in years. "Hayes?" he asked, glancing at Calder, then her. She flinched. "That's not me," she said. He frowned, glanced down. "Says it's from the San Xavier mission. Someone from your past." She didn't take the envelope. "Tell them I've chosen my own name." The man tipped his hat, confused but not unkind, and rode off. Calder watched her carefully. "You gonna be all right?" A small motion. Agreement, maybe. "I already am." That night she wrote her own letter. Not to send, to say. "I was not made for the spaces you built to contain me. I was not born to answer to the names others feared to carry. I was born to remember, to build, to stay. My name is Tyen, and I'm no longer asking what that means." She folded the paper, set it by the fire, let the heat curl the edges, then blacken the middle. Not as an ending, as a seal. Weeks passed. The new building took shape. Friends, if they could be called that, came by. Dorsey, the leather worker. Alma, the school teacher. A boy named Jesse who helped paint the door frame. They didn't ask questions. They brought nails, bread, a flower pot with a cactus inside. "We thought it was time you had something that could bloom," Alma said. Tyen thanked her, but said nothing else. Because what could she say? That she'd started to believe in her own roots? That she no longer feared the rain? That a man who used to only speak in shrugs had become her mirror? She didn't say it, but she felt it, with every board they nailed, with every seed she planted. One morning, Calder found her by the tree she'd planted weeks ago. It had sprouted, small, trembling leaves curled toward the sun. She was tying a strip of leather around the base. "What's it for?" he asked. "A marker." "For what?" "For the place I chose to stand." He stepped closer. "You think it'll grow?" "I think I will." That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn gold, then purple, then black. "I never thought this would be mine," Tyen said quietly. "The house? The sky?" He didn't laugh. Instead, he said, "It always was. You just had to claim it." She leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "I'm not leaving." He kissed her hair. "I know. Some women run because they have no other choice. Tyen ran because she was never given one. But in the end, she didn't stay because someone saved her. She stayed because she saved herself, with sweat, with soil, with silence that finally meant strength. She was marked for death. She chose life. She was born with a name she couldn't say out loud. Now the land says it for her. Every time it rains, every time the forge glows, every time a man who used to grieve in silence smiles in the sun. She is not a ghost. She is not a wound. She is Tyen, and her name is something the rain can't wash away. Have you ever chosen to stay somewhere or with someone when every part of you had been taught to run? Do you believe that love is something we earn or something we grow into? like roots, like rain, like silence made full. Tell us what part of Tyen's journey stayed with you the longest, and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Your words matter here. Some stories end, but others, they become part of who we are. The dry wind came low and lazy across the plains outside Willow Run, carrying dust, heat, and 100 unspoken opinions. They said Jonas Calloway had finally lost his senses. The wealthiest cattleman west of the Cimarron, owner of more land than the courthouse could map, and the one bachelor every widow and preacher's niece had once circled like buzzards over a tired steer, was getting married. But not to beauty, not to a southern belle in satin gloves or an eastern debutante with perfume and pedigree. Number Jonas Calloway had sent for Maribel Quinn, the daughter of a ruined rancher, a woman whose name stirred no envy, no desire, just puzzled glances and snide remarks like, "She's plain as prairie chalk." The whispers started long before she stepped off that stagecoach. By the time her boots hit the dirt, Jonas stood waiting, stone-faced as ever. No flowers, no music, just the low whistle of wind across the dust. Maribel squared her shoulders, eyes scanning the faces that judged her already. But when her gaze met Jonas's, she didn't flinch. She nodded once. He returned the gesture, and just like that, a marriage began. Not with love, but with terms. But out here, even the hardest ground can surprise you, especially when a seed dares to take root. The first thing Maribel Quinn noticed wasn't the size of the ranch, though it loomed large against the prairie sky. It was the silence. Not the kind found in churches or graveyards, but a working kind. The kind built out of sweat and expectation. Jonas Calloway stood in that silence, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, like the land itself had shaped him. Maribel descended from the wagon with dust on her boots and a letter of promise in her satchel. The sun pressed down hard, tinning the edges of her vision gold. Her bonnet, tied too tightly against the wind, did little to hide her crooked jaw or the thin scar that traced her right cheekbone. She didn't look up at Jonas immediately. She didn't need to. She felt his gaze like the weight of a loaded coin. "Miss Quinn?" he asked, voice low, not unkind. She turned, chin lifted. "I go by Maribel." He gave a single nod, one she'd later come to know meant agreement, not welcome. Jonas wasn't a man to waste words, and she wasn't a woman to beg for more than necessary. They stood a moment longer in that mutual silence, until a chestnut mare whinnied from the corral behind the barn, breaking the spell. Jonas gestured toward the main house, a long, narrow structure built with more utility than pride. She followed him up the steps and into a room that smelled of cured leather and old ash. "I've cleared the guest room," he said. "You can settle in there till we speak with the preacher." "No ceremony?" she asked. His jaw shifted. "Just papers." Maribel nodded. That was what she agreed to, after all. A paper marriage, not a courtship. A place to live in exchange for steady hands and the assumption of a wife's role. She wasn't a romantic, not anymore. Not since her father's ranch burned and the bank took the rest. She'd learned that survival didn't care for flowers or music. Jonas watched her place her satchel on the floor. "You were honest in your letter about not being sought after. And you were honest about needing help," she said, looking him square in the eye. "We're even." There was something in his stare, not warmth, but a faint shift, like he recognized the steadiness in her voice as something familiar. He left her then, with a curt, "Supper's at sundown," and the sound of his boots fading into the hallway. The ranch was wide and wild, the kind of place that looked like it might shake off a weak hand. Maribel spent the afternoon walking its edge, noting the drooping fence lines, the blistered pasture, the cracked water troughs. It wasn't failing, not yet, but it was close, the kind of close only a seasoned rancher would see. When sundown came, she sat at Jonas's table with a bowl of rabbit stew between them and a single oil lamp flickering over their plates. "You live alone long?" she asked. 3 years. He didn't elaborate, but she didn't ask. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had a kind of rhythm, like hoofbeats in soft earth. "You expect me to cook?" she asked, half teasing. He raised a brow. "Can you? Enough not to starve." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That'll do." After supper, he cleared the table while she dried the plates. He didn't ask about her scar, and she didn't ask about the wooden frame tucked behind the hearth, its glass gone, its contents burned out. Some stories were best read by their missing pages. By morning, Maribel was in the barn before the rooster crowed. She saddled the mule herself, led it to the west pasture, and spent 3 hours mending the worst of the fence. Jonas found her there, hammer in hand, shirt sleeves rolled. "You don't waste time," he said. "I didn't come here to braid daisies." That was the first time he truly looked at her. Not at her face, but at the way she moved, sure-footed, no flourish. He handed her a water skin, and they drank side by side, watching a distant storm cloud roll low across the southern plain. "She won't break it," she said, nodding toward the mule. "She? I named her Gertie. She looks like one." Jonas exhaled a short breath through his nose. A laugh, maybe. That afternoon, they rode to town together. The preacher signed the paper without fuss. Maribel wrote her name with no flourish, just ink and decision. Jonas pressed his thumbprint beside hers, and just like that, she was Mrs. Calloway. No wedding dress, no guess. Only the wind through the cottonwoods and the sound of a pen scratching across parchment. On the ride back, Maribel asked, "Will the town care?" Jonas shook his head. "They talk no matter what. You'll learn to ignore it." She nodded, but she knew it would come. The stares, the whispers about the plain bride, the scar-faced woman who wed the most stubborn rancher in the county. "They'll say I tricked you," she murmured. Jonas guided his horse closer. "Let them." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not pity, but something better. Recognition, not love, not yet, but the kind of mutual understanding that could weather things other couples didn't survive. When they reached the ranch gate, she dismounted first, holding the gate open for him. He passed through, giving her a nod that felt more like an invitation than thanks. And behind them, the prairie wind shifted, just slightly, like it too had been waiting for something to begin. The morning after they signed the marriage papers, Maribel woke before dawn. The cabin was dark but warm, the fire still alive under the ash. She sat up, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Jonas had left already. She could tell by the lack of creaking floorboards and the cold in his coffee mug. He moved like a man used to, waking up before thought took root. Outside, the wind whispered over the dry prairie grass, brushing the porch like a warning. Maribel poured herself a cup of coffee, black and sharp, and stepped out to watch the sky lighten. Gertie whinnied from the corral, and in the distance a hawk cut lazy circles over the field. She was still getting used to the quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the brittle, stretched, too thin kind that came before a break. The ranch wasn't failing, but it was tired. The land, the buildings, even Jonas himself carried that weight. He didn't say it, but she saw it, in the way his shoulders never dropped, in the way his boots barely left a print, like even gravity gave up trying to hold him down. By the time she finished her coffee, Jonas had returned from the creek, a pair of dead coyotes slung over the back of his gelding. "Found them by the lower fence line," he said, "torn into 2 calves. "Damn," Maribel muttered. "That's the 3rd attack this week." He nodded grimly. "If we don't find where they're getting through, we'll lose more." "I'll ride east and check the boundary posts," she offered. "You can ride south, see if the dry gulch washed out again." Jonas eyed her. "You don't have to." "I'm married into this," she said flatly. "I'm not hanging curtains while you patch holes." His expression didn't change, but something in his jaw eased. They saddled their horses in silence. When she mounted, Jonas handed her a shotgun, an old Remington, oiled and worn. "Just in case," he said. She took it without question. The eastern boundary ran through a low ridge of limestone and cedar brush. The posts there were warped, some leaning, one snapped clean in 2. A trail of scat and paw prints confirmed her suspicion. Coyotes had found a pass-through. She dismounted, drove a wedge into the broken post, and set about reinforcing it with wire. Her hands moved fast, practiced, and she found herself humming under her breath. Her father had taught her this work, before the drought took the land, and the bank took everything else. After an hour, she stood back, brushed the dirt off her knees, and scanned the horizon. Far off, dusk curled. Jonas returning. When he rode up, his hat pulled low against the sun, she called out, "The brake's here. They've been using it like a door." "I figured," he said, dismounting. "Gulch is fine, but I saw smoke west of the range line." She stiffened. "Brush fire?" He nodded. "Small, but could run if the wind turns." "How far?" "5 miles, near the Fletcher line." Maribel's face soured. The Fletchers were careless ranchers, lazy fencing, dry brush stacked near arroyos, and a bad habit of burning fields without watching the wind. "They won't own up if it jumps your fence." "I know." They rode to the ridge overlooking the western pasture. From there they could see a faint smear of smoke, rising like a prayer gone wrong. Jonas crouched, watching the wind stir the grass. "We need a brake line. If it jumps the stream bed, it'll chew straight through our hayfield." "We don't have enough men," she said, thinking aloud. "But if we dig fast, clear a strip around the west edge, we might stop it." He turned to her. "You know how to set a backfire?" She nodded. "Learned during the 1875 burns. My father made me practice with a wet gunny sack and a shovel." He studied her again, the way he did when weighing a new tool in his hand. Not judgmental, just cautious. Then he stood. "Let's start." They dug until their arms burned. The line was crude, but it would do. When the sun dipped low and the wind began to shift, Jonas lit the torch and dropped it into the dried grass along the firebreak. Flames flared up, brief and fast, crawling along the line with hungry speed. The controlled burn pushed back toward the oncoming fire, smoke rising thick and hot. Maribel stood watch with the shovel, tamping sparks before they could leap. Jonas worked the far end, eyes fixed on the advancing plume. For nearly 2 hours they battled the fire. By the time it died, their clothes stank of smoke, their skins streaked with soot. Jonas dropped his torch and looked at her, face unreadable. "You know," he said hoarsely, "I figured you'd come here quiet and keep to yourself." Maribel wiped her brow. "That what you wanted?" He shook his head. "Didn't know what I wanted. Still don't." She nodded, grounding the shovel in the dirt. "Good. Neither do I. But I know this. If the fire comes again, we don't run." He looked at her then, really looked, not with surprise, but with something like agreement. "That's the kind of wife I need," he said quietly. She gave him a tired smile. "That's the kind I am." They didn't embrace, didn't even touch, but they stood side by side while the wind cooled the earth and the smoke drifted away like a threat that had missed its chance. And behind them, the ranch, tired but intact, stood waiting for whatever came next. The ranch hands had started watching her differently. It wasn't the lewd glances she might have expected. Maribel Quinn knew those, and these weren't that. This was worse, a kind of wariness, as if they weren't sure whether to salute or back away. Jonas hadn't said a word about her presence in the fields, nor had he corrected her when she questioned fence placement or suggested rotating the herd, and that unsettled them. To most of them, a ranch wife wasn't meant to speak unless it was over supper. On the fourth morning, when she entered the tack house before dawn, one of the younger men, Samuel, a cowhand barely out of boyhood, froze with a coil of rope in his hand. "Didn't mean to be in your way, ma'am," he muttered, backing off like she'd struck him. "You're not," she said, brushing past. "Where's the ledger for the tool rotation?" He blinked. "Boss keeps that in the main house." "No," she said firmly. "He moved it here yesterday, said it'd save time." She didn't wait for agreement, just found the ledger under a saddle blanket and started flipping through pages. Jonas had, in fact, said nothing of the sort, but if she wanted to be taken seriously, she'd need to speak like someone who already belonged. Later that day, she found Jonas near the south pasture, crouched beside a patch of trampled earth. A heifer had gone missing. Wolves, most likely, or rustlers. Neither boded well. He looked up when she approached. "Tracks run west. Real shallow. Could be strays, but..." He didn't finish the thought. "We'll find her," Maribel said, "but it's not the cow you're worried about." He didn't argue. Rustling had always been a risk, but this was different. The lines between cattle and crime blurred easy on the frontier, and Maribel knew how fast a missing head could turn into a feud. She crouched beside him, studying the prints. "Small feet, 2 men, 1 shod horse," she murmured. "They weren't rushing." Jonas gave a small nod. "That's what I saw." They followed the trail for nearly an hour. At a narrow creek bed, Jonas paused, fingers brushing a deep hoof print. Then he pointed toward a stand of cottonwoods. There. Maribel spotted the smoke first, thin and gray, coiling up from behind a boulder. They dismounted, moved slow. Two figures sat by a fire. One was a boy, no older than 16, boots scuffed, hat too big. The other was lean and weathered, rifle across his knees. At their feet stood the missing heifer, roped and calm, chewing cud like nothing was amiss. Jonas stepped out first. "You're on Callaway land." The older man didn't stand. "Didn't plan to be." "Then why the cow?" "She followed us." Maribel raised an eyebrow. "And you just happened to rope her, start a fire, and cook lunch?" The man smirked. "She was hungry, so were we." Jonas's hand hovered near his belt. "Name?" "Lyle Hart," the man said evenly. "This is my boy. We're heading south. Didn't mean no harm." "You always rope cattle for companionship?" "If I was stealing," Lyle said slowly, "I wouldn't have made a fire." Jonas stared at him for a long moment, then said, "Let the cow go. Walk east till you hit the ridge. Stay off my land." Lyle stood, tossing the rope off the cow. "Fair enough." As they turned to leave, Maribel spoke. "You make this mistake again, I won't be the one telling you to walk." Lyle glanced back. "No offense, ma'am, but you don't seem the shooting kind." She stepped forward, eyes hard. "Then you haven't met the right kind of woman." He looked at Jonas, who gave no sign of disagreement, then tipped his hat and left. That evening, the sun dipped low behind the barns. Jonas leaned against the porch post while Maribel removed her boots by the steps. "You didn't have to follow me today," he said quietly. "I wasn't following. I was working." He nodded slowly. "You think I should have made an example of them?" "Only if you want blood on dry ground. They're desperate, not cruel." A pause, then, "You were right." She looked up, surprised. "About the cow, the tracks, about them." Maribel almost smiled. "That's 2 times in 3 days you've said that." "I'm counting?" he asked. "I am." They stood quietly. Then Jonas added, "My father wouldn't have liked it. You taking the lead. He sounds like a treat. He was hard, respected order, thought a woman's place was wherever he wasn't." "Well," she said, brushing dust from her trousers, "I'm not your father's wife." He didn't respond, but something in his posture eased. After supper, as she sorted tools by the barn, a figure approached. Jeb Lockett, one of the older hands. "Ma'am," he said, doffing his hat. "Evening, Jeb." He hesitated, voice gruff. "Some of the boys, they ain't sure how to take things. You doing what you do." "Meaning?" "Meaning they're used to the boss making decisions. Men like to know where the lines are." She met his gaze. "Then they best get used to new lines. I'm not here to play house. I'm here to help this ranch stand." Jeb studied her, jaw working. Then he nodded. "That's what I told him." When he walked away, Maribel leaned against the barn door, heart still thumping. Not everyone was on her side. But maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand she wasn't going anywhere. And neither was the fire in her. The morning started like most others. Quiet, with the scent of wood smoke drifting from the chimney and the soft thud of boots on packed earth. Maribel was up before the ranch hands, already checking the southeast fence line with a coil of wire slung across her shoulder. The sun hadn't yet climbed high, but the wind was rising, sharp and dry, the kind that hinted at change. When she returned to the main house, Jonas was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and a ledger spread before him. He looked up, nodded once. "You've been out." "Fence was down near the watering hole. Looks like a mule deer pushed through." He didn't question her, just made a note in the ledger. That was how they'd begun operating. Quietly, efficiently, with a rhythm built not on affection, but on mutual trust. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something, until the knock came. It was sharp and unexpected. 3 raps against the front door, just as Maribel was hanging her coat by the wall. Jonas opened the door slowly. A woman stood on the porch, wrapped in a travel cloak dusted with trail dirt. Her boots were polished despite the wear, and her hat cast a shadow that did little to hide the sharp angles of her face. She smiled. "Hello, Jonas." Maribel didn't move. She watched as Jonas's shoulders went stiff. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he stepped back. Come in, Evelyn. Maribel's breath caught. Evelyn. That name didn't appear anywhere in the ledgers or barn talk, but it landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. The woman stepped inside like she belonged. I heard the Calloway place was still standing. Figured I'd see for myself. Why now? Jonas asked, his voice low. She shrugged. Passing through, thought I'd say hello and see what kind of woman finally agreed to marry you. Her eyes flicked to Maribel. I'm Maribel Quinn, she said evenly. I don't believe we've met. Not yet, Evelyn said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But I've heard plenty. Word gets around Dodge. Jonas cleared his throat. Evelyn and I used to keep company, Evelyn interrupted. Years ago. There was a silence thick enough to chew. I'll fix some coffee, Maribel said, and disappeared into the kitchen before the fire in her throat could reach her mouth. They sat at the table, Jonas quiet, Evelyn lounging like a cat with claws tucked just out of sight. Maribel brought the coffee and sat without a word. So, Evelyn said, this arrangement you two have, it's real? Maribel looked up. What arrangement? You know, Evelyn said, lifting her cup. The kind where a man marries a woman for convenience, or pity. Jonas stiffened. That's enough. Evelyn shrugged. No harm meant. I just figured Jonas for the type who'd die alone before giving up his pride. He hasn't given up anything, Maribel said quietly. He's building something, and so am I. Evelyn tilted her head. Well now, they're stealing you after all. She stood, brushing off her coat. I should be going. Just wanted to see if the stories were true. Jonas followed her to the porch. Maribel didn't. Through the open door, she heard the hushed exchange. You came to stir trouble? Jonas asked. Evelyn's voice was like silk drawn over glass. I came because I thought I might have made a mistake letting you go. But I see you've settled. Good for you. A pause, then, she's different. Just be sure you know what you're doing, Jonas. Boots on the steps, the sound of a horse being mounted. And then Evelyn was gone. Maribel didn't speak of it. She didn't ask Jonas what Evelyn had meant to him or whether there had been love there once. She focused on the accounts, on the feed storage, on the rotation schedule they were building for winter. But Jonas saw the change, the way her shoulders tightened when he entered a room, the way she never asked if he wanted company when she brought supper to the porch. One night, as they were finishing their notes by lamplight, he finally spoke. Evelyn didn't come for me, he said. Not really. She came to remind herself she still had teeth. Maribel didn't look up. She was part of my life before the war, before the ranch was mine. I thought, once, maybe we'd build something. But she's the kind who likes to break things just to see if they bleed. Maribel closed the ledger. I'm not angry, she said. I just didn't expect to be tested this early. He nodded. You handled her better than I would have. She stood, heading for the stairs. Jonas? Yeah? I'm not here because I'm grateful. I'm here because I chose this. You, the land, all of it. And for the first time, something unspoken in his eyes shifted. Like stone cracking under pressure, not breaking, just changing. The next morning, Evelyn's visit was already town gossip. Jude muttered something about old ghosts never staying buried. The stable boy asked Maribel if the woman in the red cloak was her sister. Maribel just smiled, mounted her mare, and rode south with a clipboard in hand. They had pastures to check, cattle to move. The land didn't care about old flames, only what came next. The first rain in weeks came thin as sewing thread, but it was enough to darken the dust and perk up the prairie grasses. Maribel stood beneath the overhang of the hayshed, sleeves rolled, face tilted toward the sky. She didn't smile, not quite, but her shoulders loosened as the water struck her cheeks. Inside the barn, Jonas was oiling the saddle leather when he saw her there. No bonnet, no umbrella, just standing in it like the land itself. You'll catch cold, he called. Maribel turned toward him. Not if I'm already warm. Jonas chuckled, the sound soft and rare. By the end of that week, the eastern field had greened. The calves born in spring grew bolder, and the books, thanks to Maribel, finally showed more black than red. She'd restructured supply deliveries, negotiated fairer grazing deals with 2 neighboring ranchers, and started drafting a plan to implement wind-powered pumps on the drier acres. I didn't marry a woman, Jonas told Jude one morning. I married a damn operations manual. Jude smirked. That's so? Might be the best contract you ever signed. Despite the improvements, the tension hadn't vanished. Not with Evelyn's echo still lingering in the minds of some of the ranch hands, or in Jonas himself, who, though grateful for all Maribel had brought, wrestled with something harder to name. He'd built the ranch with muscle and grit, but Maribel, she was building its future, and that scared him more than any stampede ever had. Trouble came in a polished wagon with gold trim and wheels too clean for real country use. Maribel spotted it first from the upstairs window. A two-horse rig, driver in a bowler hat, and a tall figure descending with calculated ease. Jonas met them on the porch, arms folded. Mr. Calloway, said the visitor with a wax smile. You may not recall me, but my name is Eldon Price. My uncle Wallace Price once ran cattle through these very hills. Bought up half the valley before the war. I remember Wallace, Jonas said, tone flat. He's the reason I built this place twice. Then you know the name carries weight. Jonas didn't answer. Eldon stepped forward. I've come with an offer. One you'd be wise to hear. Maribel appeared at the doorway, arms crossed. Eldon's gaze flicked to her, then lingered a beat too long. Mrs. Calloway, I presume. Maribel nodded. Say your piece. Eldon cleared his throat. The Calloway property holds land that once belonged to a rival family, your southwestern field specifically. My partners are prepared to offer double market rate. Jonas's jaw tightened. Not for sale. Perhaps reconsider. That land is bone dry and half feral. Funny, Maribel said. It's the same patch we just seeded with winter rye and mapped for a windmill. Eldon's smile faded a hair. A generous offer, I assure you. And ours is a firm refusal, she said, stepping beside Jonas. Now if there's nothing else… Eldon raised a hand. Be careful where you hang your pride. This region has long memories. The Calloway name still turns heads in Topeka. Jonas took a step forward. You're standing on my porch, threatening me? A reminder, Mr. Calloway, not a threat. Then take your reminder and ride. Eldon tipped his hat mockingly. As you wish. When the wagon rolled away, kicking dust back toward town, Maribel glanced at Jonas. That name always cast a long shadow. Longer than it deserves, Jonas muttered, and dirtier. That night, Jonas stayed late in the barn, chopping wood that didn't need splitting. Maribel found him there, sleeves rolled high, sweat painting the back of his shirt. Something you're trying not to say? She asked from the doorway. Jonas paused. That man's uncle bled this land dry, sold water rights to a railroad, got men killed defending what he didn't even own. And now the nephew wants to do it again. He nodded. I've worked too long to lose it all to a signature. She stepped closer. Then we don't let them. We build. We hold. Jonas leaned on the axe. You really believe this place can stand? Maribel looked around. The neat rows of feed barrels, the lanterns she'd rewired. The coils of new rope hung just so. Yes, she said, because now it's not just yours. It's ours. Later that week, they hosted a gathering. Nothing formal, just neighbors and hands. Folks came from all directions. Widow Mathers from over the ridge, the Crowleys from the canyon, even Sam Dupree with his 3 wild boys and fiddle. Maribel served cider and kept the fire steady. Jonas smoked his pipe on the porch, nodding to folks he once only passed in town. As the stars blinked open above the prairie, someone passed around a bottle of cherry whiskey. The fiddle took on a sharper tune, and hands clapped in time. It was Maribel who stepped forward, offered her hand to Jonas. He looked surprised. I don't dance. You don't try, she said, smiling. And he did try. Awkwardly at first, boots heavy, steps off rhythm. But Maribel steadied him, hand warm in his. They danced under starlight and lantern glow, the wind threading through the grass like a lullaby. Later that night, after the guests rode home, and the last lantern was snuffed, Jonas stood by the window, watching the fields. Maribel came up behind him, quiet. I meant what I said, she told him. So did I. He turned to her. I'm married for structure, for help. But you've given me more than that, Maribel. She searched his face. You've given me hope. And this time, it was she who leaned in. Not out of obligation, not out of gratitude, but because something between them had turned real, and she wasn't afraid to name it anymore. The morning broke, pale and brittle, a hush over the Callaway Ranch like the earth itself had paused to hear what would come next. Jonas stood on the porch, rifle resting against one leg, steam curling from the tin mug in his hand. Below him, the field stretched wide and gold under a low sun. His land, his choice, and now maybe hers too. Behind him, the door creaked open. Maribel stepped out, wrapping her shawl tighter against the cold. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, looking at the same horizon. Jonas didn't glance her way. He didn't need to. "They'll come again today," she said. He nodded. "Eldon Price doesn't strike me as the patient kind." Maribel's eyes were tired but sharp. "Then we finish this." They had spent the night preparing, boarded windows, loaded rifles, letters to the county office and the neighboring ranchers. Jonas had even moved the deed to the cabin floor, under the loose plank near the hearth. If something happened, he told Maribel, someone would know what this land had cost, but neither of them had slept. As the sun climbed, a dust plume appeared to the west, then resolved into a black carriage and 3 riders on horseback. Jonas and Maribel didn't move. The carriage rolled up to the yard, creaking under its own arrogance. Eldon Price stepped out like a banker, come to collect on a man's last breath. "Morning, Mr. Callaway," he called, adjusting his gloves. Jonas stepped off the porch slowly, boots crunching. "Didn't think you'd bring company. That shows poor manners." Eldon gave a short, practiced laugh. "Legal men, witnesses. I came for a signature, not a fight." Maribel stood taller on the porch. "You came with men packing rifles for a signature?" Eldon turned his smile on her, but it didn't hold. "You must be the new mistress of Callaway Ranch. Miss Quinn, was it? You've stirred quite the gossip. They say you're the one running things now." Jonas's voice was quiet but hard. "She's not running things. She's building them. You got a problem with that?" Eldon gestured lazily toward his lawyer, who produced a stack of papers from a leather satchel. "My offer still stands. Triple market value now, Mr. Callaway. That southwestern field, useless to you. Priceless to my partners. You sign and we're done." Jonas didn't look at the papers. He looked at Maribel. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. "You think money makes you right," Jonas said finally, "but it just makes you louder." Eldon's eyes narrowed. "I've tried to handle this respectfully, but if you won't sell, my lawyers will bury you in injunctions. You'll spend the next year just trying to haul your own feed. You'll lose before the cattle ever do." Maribel spoke now, her voice level. "Then we lose. On our feet." Eldon took a step forward, his calm beginning to crack. "Don't make a mistake just to feel noble. There's no honor in starving." Jonas moved between him and Maribel. "And there's no pride in selling what ain't yours to give." The moment stretched. Eldon's men rested hands on their holsters. One shifted his horse nervously. Jonas didn't blink. Then from the east came a second dust cloud. Riders. A dozen at least. As they drew closer, it became clear they weren't with Eldon Price. It was Clayton Reeves, the old rancher from Bitter Ridge, and behind him, some of the smaller ranchers from neighboring lands, Anders, McCready, and the rest. They rode slow, deliberate, stopping just outside the yard. Every man carried a rifle, not raised, just present. Jonas looked to Maribel, and her eyes sparked. Clayton tipped his hat. "Heard you might need neighbors." Jonas smiled, small and real. "I reckon we might." Eldon took a long breath. "So this is how it is?" "No," Maribel said softly. "This is what it becomes when folks stop being afraid of men with pens and polished boots." Eldon's lips thinned. He stepped back toward his carriage. "This isn't over." Jonas raised his voice so the whole yard heard it. "It is if you take that road out of here." Eldon stared a moment longer, but then turned, climbing into the carriage. His men followed without a word. The carriage rolled away. Only when the dust fully settled did Jonas exhale. Maribel stepped down and stood beside him. "That was a gamble." He nodded. "Most things worth keeping are." The other ranchers approached, and for the first time, there was no unease in their expressions, just a kind of reverent respect. Clayton dismounted. You held firm. Both of you. That means something around here. Jonas shook his hand. We'll hold for more than just ourselves if it comes to it. We know, Clayton said. That's why we came. By sundown, the yard had emptied, but a new stillness hung in the air. Not fear, but calm. A knowing. Inside the cabin, Jonas stood at the hearth while Maribel boiled water for coffee. She moved like she belonged there now, because she did. He watched her for a while, then spoke. You ever wonder how things end up the way they do? Maribel didn't turn. Every day. I don't remember the first time I hoped for more. Maybe the day you wrote in. She set the pot down, then looked at him. You didn't ask for a partner, but I became one. He stepped closer. And I never asked to fall in love with a woman everyone underestimated. Maribel blinked. Say that again. Jonas, I love you. Maribel stepped into him, hands at his chest. I didn't marry for love, she said quietly, but I stayed for it. Then softer. Let's choose each other, every day, no matter what rides in. And in the quiet cabin on Callaway land, two people who had nothing to prove to anyone else finally let their guard down. And when their hands met, it wasn't ceremony, it was truth. The wind still carries stories out here, of land fought for, of names nearly buried, and of two souls who refused to bow to anyone else's expectations. Maribel Quinn arrived with nothing but her name and her will. Jonas Callaway offered her ground to stand on. Together, they built something the Plains would remember. But now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Did this story remind you of something you've lived, lost, or still hold on to? We'd love to know what moment hit you hardest. Was it Maribel standing her ground, or Jonas finally lowering his guard? If tales like this one stir something in you, courage, hope, or just the love of a well-earned ending, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap that bell so you don't miss the next ride into the wild unknown. Until then, keep the fire burning, the rifle oiled, and your heart open. Another story waits just past the horizon.